Growing up in the Carter family, I always knew my role. My younger brother, Zach, was a star quarterback, the family's golden ticket. The kid who could set the kitchen on fire and still get a standing ovation. Me, I was the designated workhorse. The guy who actually kept Carter's Prime running while Zach hustled by throwing lavish yacht parties and posting motivational quotes about grinding from poolside cabanas. It started early. When I was 16, my dad, Richard Carter, handed me an apron and said, "Real men earn their place," before shoving me into the kitchen of our flagship restaurant. Zach, he got a brand new Range Rover for his 16th birthday and crashed it within a month. No problem. He got a custom Porsche the next week because, as my mom liked to say, Zach's happiness is an investment in the future of the Carter name. By the time I turned 20, I was managing 3 locations of our high-end steakhouse chain, while Zach was networking in L.A. clubs, which meant spending thousands on bottle service and posting blurry selfies with C-list celebrities. I barely had time for a social life, but I told myself it was fine because one day, all this work would pay off. One day, I'd be at the helm of Carter's Prime, the reward for my years of grinding. That was the lie I clung to. I worked my tail off, saved every dollar I could, and after years of double shifts and missed vacations, I finally bought something for myself, a 2-story beach house in Malibu. It was my one real indulgence, my sanctuary, my proof that my work had meant something. Zach, of course, hated that. He had his eye on that house since we were kids, back when he believed everything he wanted would be handed to him. But this was mine. I earned it. Too bad my family didn't see it that way. One day, this will all be yours anyway. My dad once told Zach while standing on my back patio, sipping one of my beers like he owned the place. He said it so casually, like my house was just another piece of family property, something that would inevitably fall into Zach's lap when the time was right. And that's when I should have paid attention. See, when I bought the house, my dad convinced me to put it under the company's name. "It's for tax purposes," he had said, waving off my hesitation. "It'll save you a fortune." I was young, busy running the business, and at the time, it sounded like good advice. What I didn't realize was that by doing that, I had signed away the one thing I thought was truly mine. I laughed it off back then. No way, I thought. I bought this place myself. My name's on the deed. They can't take it from me. Turns out I was wrong. A few days ago, I got a letter from our family's corporate attorney. At first, I thought it was some routine paperwork, maybe something about tax filings. But when I opened it, my stomach hit the floor. The company was preparing documents to transfer ownership of my house to Zach as a corporate asset. My house, the one I worked myself to the bone for, the one I paid for with years of work and sacrifice, and they were just giving it away like it was a spare set of golf clubs or an extra yacht they forgot they owned. And the worst part, I wasn't even surprised. Sitting in my office at Carter's Prime, I stared at the letter again, hoping I'd misread it. Nope. My house, my one piece of independence, was being handed over to Zach like some kind of corporate raffle prize. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought I might crack a tooth. I stormed into my dad's office, fully expecting some kind of joke, a misunderstanding. Instead, he barely looked up from his laptop. When I demanded an explanation, he sighed like I was the one being dramatic. It was a smart financial decision, he said. According to him, Zach would better utilize the house for brand. I asked what that even meant. Was he turning my home into an influencer crash pad? A backdrop for one of Zach's ridiculous yacht parties? Dad just waved me off like I was being unreasonable. Mom wasn't any better. I confronted her that evening, hoping she'd at least pretend to care. She sat me down at the kitchen table, clasped my hands like she was delivering tragic news, and told me that families should support each other. Zach was younger, she said. He needed the house more than I did. I tried to wrap my head around that logic, like my 34-year-old self was somehow thriving so much that I didn't need a home. Speaking of Zach, he didn't even bother pretending to be humble. He strolled into my house that night, made himself comfortable on my couch, poured himself a drink from my bar, and grinned. "About time," he said, like he was inheriting some birthright. Instead of stealing the house, I worked myself to the bone to buy. I reminded him, repeatedly, that I bought the house with my own money, my own work. He waved it off like a minor inconvenience. "You're never here anyway," he said, like that justified taking it. That was the moment it all clicked. This wasn't just about the house. It never was. My entire life, I have been working under the illusion that my dedication meant something, that my sacrifices would pay off. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was just a free manager for the family business. I had built Carter's Prime into a powerhouse, while my family used me as their personal cash machine. And worse, they were using company money to fund Zach's lifestyle. I started digging. At first, I just wanted proof, something I could shove in my dad's face to make him admit how absurd this was. But the deeper I looked, the uglier it got. The expense reports weren't even subtle. Marketing initiatives covered luxury cars, private chefs, and VIP vacations. Client engagement translated to Zach's month-long stays at five-star resorts. There were no clients, just Zach blowing through company funds like they were monopoly money. I needed answers, so I called the family's attorney, thinking maybe, just maybe, there was a legal way to block this house transfer. Instead, he told me something worse. The company was drowning in debt, millions in losses, hidden under creative accounting and strategic delays. Carter's Prime wasn't thriving. It was barely staying afloat. My father, my mother, my brother, they were all spending money that wasn't there, living in a fantasy world while I was killing myself to keep the business running. And now, they want to take my house, too. I hung up the phone, heart pounding, mind racing. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just being sidelined. I was being set up to go down with the ship, and I had no intention of sinking with them. The invitation arrived in an elegant gold-trimmed envelope, the kind you'd expect for a high-end gala, not a family birthday party. The words "Join us for an unforgettable evening at Carter's Prime" were embossed in thick, formal lettering. My gut told me something was off. My father's birthday had always been a small affair, expensive, yes, but never a grand spectacle. This was a full-scale production, the kind of thing reserved for politicians or billionaires unveiling a new skyscraper. I should have ignored it. I should have made up an excuse, said I had a business trip, a last-minute emergency, or hell, even the flu. But deep down, I was too stubborn. Maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see how low they'd sink this time. The moment I stepped into the restaurant, I knew I'd walked into a setup. The place had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers, velvet ropes at the entrance, an actual red carpet leading inside. Waiters in crisp white uniforms floated to the crowd with trays of champagne, and the room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses and the scent of overpriced cologne. My parents knew I'd put on a show, and tonight, they'd pulled out all the stops. At first, it seemed like business as usual. Rich people schmoozing, my dad shaking hands with people whose names he'd forget in an hour. My mother was in full hostess mode, charming her way through the room, making sure the right people saw her expensive jewelry and designer dress. And Zach, he was playing his role to perfection, flashing his effortlessly cool smile at anyone who would listen to his latest influencer nonsense. Then the lights dimmed, and my father took the microphone. "Tonight, we celebrate not just another year of my life, but the bright future of Carter's Prime," he announced, his voice smooth and practiced. And what better way to secure our legacy than by passing the torch to the next generation? A spotlight hit Zach. He blinked in mock surprise, his expression so over the top that I almost laughed. Almost. "I am beyond proud to introduce the new face of Carter's Prime," my father continued. "My son, Zach Carter." The applause was immediate, thunderous, the kind of reaction you'd expect if he had just cured a major disease. Cameras flashed. My stomach tightened. And because every great leader deserves a home fitting of their status, we have a special corporate gift to mark this occasion. My father gestured toward the massive projector screen behind him. The image flickered to life. It was my house, displayed like the grand prize on a game show. "Welcome home, Zach." My father beamed, raising a toast. The audience cheered. My mother clapped enthusiastically, but I caught the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Just a split second of awareness that maybe, just maybe, they had gone too far. I waited for the anger, the outrage, the feeling of betrayal to hit like a freight train. But instead, something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was done. They expected me to accept it, to shake hands, to smile through gritted teeth and tell myself, once again, that this was just how things worked. Because in their world, I didn't fight back. I worked. I sacrificed. I kept the wheels turning while they enjoyed the ride. And that was supposed to be my role. Not anymore. I set down my untouched drink, straightened my tie, and turned toward the exit. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking away to prepare for war. I didn't go home after leaving that disaster of a party. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Liam Harper had been handling my personal legal affairs for years. Wills, property agreements, the occasional contract review. But now I needed him for something bigger. When I walked in, he already had a bottle of bourbon on the table. "Figured you need a drink," he said, pouring 2 glasses. "So how bad is it?" I slid the invitation across the desk. They turned my dad's birthday into a coronation for Zach, and as a gift, they gave him my house. Liam exhaled sharply, flipping through some papers. "That's low, even for them. But I've been digging into the corporate filings like you asked, and you're not going to believe what I found." He leaned forward. "Technically, you still own 51% of Carter's Prime." I blinked. "That's impossible. My dad owns the business. I just run it." Liam shook his head. "Not according to the paperwork. Back when your dad was expanding, he set up a tax shelter, probably didn't even think about it too much at the time. Instead of putting the majority shares under his name, he used you as a proxy. On paper, you're the controlling owner. He just never told you." The realization hit like a freight train. My entire life, I had been working myself to exhaustion under the belief that I was just an employee, expendable, replaceable. But in reality, I had been a majority owner of the company the whole time. My name was the one that mattered, not my father's, not Zach's. And they didn't think I'd ever figure it out. "Let me guess," I said. They were waiting for the right moment to transfer everything over to Zach. Make me sign something without realizing what it was. Liam gave a humorless chuckle. "That's exactly what they were doing. But they got cocky. If they had just let you keep the house, you might have never looked into any of this." I sat back, gripping the glass in my hand. "So what's the play here? How do I take back what's mine?" Liam pulled out another folder. "First, we lock down your stake. That means freezing any attempts they might make to transfer control without your consent. Second, we start an audit, because I guarantee you, the financials are worse than you think." I already knew where this was going. My family had been living like royalty off the company's money. Lavish vacations, custom supercars, Zach's entire influencer lifestyle. None of it came from their personal wealth. It came from the business. The same business I apparently owned. And if what Liam was saying was true, I had the power to pull the plug on all of it. "How much worse are we talking?" I asked. Liam hesitated. "Bad. But that's not the real problem." "What's the real problem?" He slid a separate document across the desk. "Zach's been involved in something bigger than just bleeding the company dry. Money's been moving through shell accounts, payments that don't add up. If I had to guess, he's got side deals happening, potentially illegal ones." I stared at the numbers. My brother wasn't just blowing through family money. He was running a full-scale financial scam, and that gave me all the leverage I needed. I leaned back, letting that sink in. "So, he's not just an entitled brat. He's a liability." Liam smirked. "Bingo. And if this gets out, he's not just losing the company. He's facing real consequences." For the first time in years, I smiled. Time to return the favor. But let's do it my way. I want them blindsided. Liam raised his glass. "Now that I can work with." The morning of a shareholder meeting, I walked into Carter's Prime headquarters like I owned the place, because technically I did. I had barely slept the night before, running through every possible scenario. how my father would react, how Zach would try to weasel his way out, how the board would handle the news that their company had been turned into a personal piggy bank. But there was no turning back now. Today was the day I stopped being the guy they pushed around. The conference room was packed. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his usual smug confidence on full display. Zach lounged in the chair beside him. Sipping an overpriced latte like this was just another pointless meeting. My mother sat 2 seats away, twisting her wedding ring, already sensing that things were about to get ugly. The rest of the board members and business partners filled the room, waiting for whatever grand announcement my father had planned. Too bad for him. I had my own announcement to make. I took my seat, tossed my folder on the table, and leaned back. Let's get started. My father cleared his throat, clearly irritated that I was taking control of the meeting. Since you're so eager, why don't you explain why you called this meeting? We have real business to discuss. I smiled. That's exactly why we're here. I slid the first document forward. This is a financial breakdown of the last 5 years. Specifically, the unauthorized spending that's been draining Carter's prime. Private jets, luxury vacations, designer clothes, expensive watches, all disguised as business expenses. But we all know whose name is tied to these charges. Zach went pale. He tried to play it cool, leaning back like he was bored, but the twitch in his jaw gave him away. This is ridiculous. My father scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. I approve all financial decisions for this company. That's exactly the problem, I said, flipping to another page, because I also have a legal report confirming that I own 51% of Carter's prime, meaning I have the authority to demand a full forensic audit of every transaction made under company funds. A murmur spread through the room. The partners exchanged glances. Some were already pulling out their phones, no doubt searching for any sign that what I was saying was true. You can't be serious, my mother said, her voice quieter than usual. Dead serious. I turned to the board members. This company has been drained completely to finance a personal lifestyle. I have the documentation to prove it. And unless we want to watch Carter's prime sink under the weight of corruption, we need to act now. That means a full audit, independent investigators, and I turned back to my father, new leadership. The room went silent. My father's face turned a deep shade of red. You ungrateful little. Careful, I said, raising a brow. This is being recorded, and if you'd like to keep any semblance of dignity, I'd suggest you let me finish. Zach finally snapped. You don't know what you're doing, man. You think you can just waltz in here and... I tapped the stack of documents. I don't think, Zach. I know, and so does the IRS. See, when I started looking into our books, I also had a chat with some people who take tax fraud very seriously. They were quite interested in some of the things I found. The color drained from Zach's face. The partners at the table were no longer on my father's side. Some of them had been suspicious for a while. Others had just been looking for an excuse to jump ship. I had given them both. I exhaled, looking directly at my father. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties as CEO. The board will convene to appoint new leadership, and until then, I'll be overseeing operations. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood up, fists clenched. This is my company. Not anymore. The weight of those words settled over the room. No one argued. No one protested. Because, for the first time, I wasn't just a guy they could walk over. I was the guy in charge. I stood up, adjusting my suit jacket, letting the silence stretch. Then, with one last glance at Zach, who now looked like he'd just realized his influencer days were numbered, I walked out of the conference room. It was time to rebuild Carter's prime. But first, it was time to make sure my family got exactly what they deserved. The morning after the shareholder meeting, I walked into Carter's prime headquarters with coffee in one hand and a plan in the other. No more playing nice. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about cleaning house. Step 1, a full forensic audit. Liam Harper, my lawyer, and probably the only person I trusted at this point, strolled into my office, followed by a team of accountants who looked like they hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration. Hope you're ready for a wild ride. Liam said, dropping a thick folder onto my desk. Because this is a financial horror story. And he wasn't kidding. Over the last 5 years, more than $7 million had disappeared from Carter's Prime accounts. Money that should have been reinvested into business, spent on upgrades, or, I don't know, used to pay actual employees, had instead been funneled into personal extravagances. And it wasn't just my father or Zach. My mother had her hands deep in the cookie jar, too. First up, dear old Dad. His business expenses included 3 luxury properties, a yacht that had never been used for corporate purposes, and fully funded golf trips with revolving door potential investors. Translation: his drinking buddies. The transactions were labeled as executive retreats. But unless swinging overpriced clubs on a beachside resort counted as work, it was all theft. Then there was my mother. Turns out, she had been running her own little scheme under the guise of corporate events. Lavish charity galas, catered by the finest chefs in L.A., designer wardrobes that made her look like she walked straight out of high fashion magazine, all charged to the company. She wasn't just playing the role of a devoted businesswoman. She was treating Carter's Prime like her personal expense account. But the real MVP of corporate fraud, Zach, his marketing budget, was about as real as his influencer career. He had been funneling company money into fake businesses, using shell accounts to make it look like he was securing high-profile sponsorships. In reality, he was paying for his entire lifestyle, his penthouse, his custom Lamborghinis, his networking trips to Ibiza, with money stolen from Carter's Prime. Liam let out a low whistle as he flipped through the pages. I've seen corporate fraud before, but this is next level. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. How airtight is this? If we take this to court, does it hold up? Liam smirked. Oh, this isn't just airtight, it's bulletproof. The IRS is going to have a field day with this. And once we go public, your parents and Zach aren't just losing money. They're losing everything. I should have felt bad. Maybe a younger version of me would have hesitated, would have thought about what this would do to my family. But that version of me was long gone. I picked up my phone and dialed the legal team. Prepare the paperwork. We're going after everything. It was time for Carter's Prime to have a new legacy, and it sure as hell wasn't going to include them. By the time Zach realized just how deep he was in, it was too late. At first, he did what he always did, try to charm his way out of it. He strolled into my office like we were just 2 brothers catching up over a beer, leaned against my desk with that lazy smirk that had bailed him out of trouble since high school. Look, man, we don't need to make this a whole thing, he started, hands up like he was some innocent guy caught in a misunderstanding. This is a family matter. No need for lawyers. No need for courts. We can work something out. You wouldn't really take this to court, would you? It'd ruin Mom. Ah, there it was. The guilt trip. I didn't even blink. Just let him talk, watching as he tried to dig himself out a hole that he hadn't even realized was already 6 feet deep. He still thought this was a game, still thought he could schmooze his way out of it. When I didn't bite, he switched tactics. That night, I got a call from my mother. The moment I answered, I could hear the tremor in her voice. Ethan, how could you do this? Your father built this company from nothing. We are a family. You can't just throw us away like this. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. Mom, I'm not the one who stole millions from the company. That was Dad. That was Zach. Silence. Then, right on cue, the next phase of the guilt trip. You're destroying everything, she whispered. Your father dedicated his life to this business. Zach, he's young, he made mistakes, but you can't let this tear us apart. I could practically hear Zach standing next to her, coaching her on exactly what to say, twisting the knife just enough to make me doubt myself. Only this time, I didn't. When guilt didn't work, Zach pivoted to threats. The next morning, he barged into my office, slamming the door behind him. You really think you're clean? You think I can't find dirt on you? He leaned in, lowering his voice like he was in some cheap crime movie. I have connections. You're not untouchable. I almost laughed. You mean the same connection that let you get away with fraud for years? Pretty sure they're not answering your calls anymore. He bristled, but I could see it now, the panic. the cracks in his confidence. He wasn't in control anymore, and he knew it. And then came the final nail in his coffin. Buried in the paperwork, hidden in a web of fake invoices and forged contracts, was one undeniable fact. Zach had signed off on every single fraudulent transaction himself. He thought he was smart, setting up fake shell companies, funneling money through marketing expenses. But he never stopped to think that the very documents he used to scam the company were the same ones that legally tied him to the crime. Liam, my lawyer, let out a low whistle as he flipped through the pages. Wow, he really did sign his own confession. I exhaled slowly, staring at my brother. It's over, Zach. You're done. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowed hard. The fight, the arrogance, the charm, it was all gone, replaced with the realization that he had finally, officially, run out of ways to cheat the system. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. Get a good lawyer. You're going to need one. Zach turned and stormed out, but we both knew this time there was nowhere left to run. The official audit results hit like a wrecking ball, and for once, I was the one swinging it. The numbers weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. Millions drained from Carter's Prime, but not on business growth or investments. No, my family had been running the company like their own unlimited expense account. Now they were paying the price. At the emergency board meeting, the decision was unanimous. The entire Carter family was out. Dad tried to fight it. He stormed into the boardroom, his face the color of a stop sign, shouting about loyalty and legacy, like either of those things could undo the trail of fraud he left behind. But the board didn't care. The lawyers didn't care. The numbers spoke louder than his ego ever could. His choices were simple. Resign quietly or have everything dragged into court for a public humiliation that would make front-page news. For a man who prided himself on control, this was the worst-case scenario. And for the first time in his life, he had no way to spin it. With shaking hands, he signed the resignation papers. Just like that, Richard Carter was no longer the owner of Carter's Prime. Mom took it worse. The moment she realized this wasn't just some temporary rough patch, that the money was actually gone, the breakdown started. Tears, pleading, the full emotional performance. Ethan, how could you do this? We're family. We built this together. I almost laughed. We, the same we, that left me working double shifts at 16 while Zach crashed his third sports car. The same we that treated me like the hired help while they bled the company dry. Then came the real wake-up call. The banks had been watching, and they weren't about to let Carter's Prime eat the debt for them. Every corporate card, canceled. Every personal account tied to the company, frozen. And when the debts piled up, there was only one way out: liquidation. First to go, the yacht. That ridiculous floating palace Dad loved to parade around in. Sold off in record time. Then came the luxury cars. Rolls-Royces, custom-built Porsches, even Mom's prize Bentley, all repossessed. But the real gut punch? The Hamptons estate, the place where they threw those over-the-top parties, the symbol of their so-called success. Gone. Sold to the highest bidder. For the first time in their lives, my parents had to think about money, about consequences, about what it meant to live without a blank check. And they absolutely hated it. A week later, Zach stormed into my office like a man with nowhere left to run. You ruined everything. You destroyed this family. I didn't even look up from my desk. No, Zach, I just stopped letting you guys use me. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. He stood there, fists clenched, waiting for me to take it back, to offer him some kind of escape hatch. But there was no deal left to make. He slammed the door on his way out. And for the first time in my life, I finally felt free. Zach had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable. Turns out, reality had other plans. When the dust settled, when the lawyers left and the headlines moved on, Zach was left standing in the ruins of a life he didn't know how to live. No trust fund, no fast cars, no VIP access. Just a guy with no skills, no money, and a rapidly fading Instagram following. At first, he tried to keep up appearances. The flashy social media posts didn't stop immediately. He borrowed outfits, pose in rented cars, even found ways to sneak into exclusive events just to snap a few photos and keep the illusion alive. But the internet is ruthless. People caught on quick. The engagement plummeted. The brand deals dried up. Within weeks, the comments went from living the dream bro to wait, didn't his family lose everything? His so-called friends, the ones who used to hype him up, tag him in every post, and invite him to every yacht party, suddenly had better things to do. Calls went unanswered. Messages left on read. No more free drinks. No more VIP tables. No more lavish vacations paid for by company funds. Without money, Zach wasn't just irrelevant. He was invisible. Then came the real wake-up call. The bills started piling up. For the first time in his life, he had to think about rent, groceries, basic survival. He had no credit, no savings, nothing to fall back on. He had always assumed his parents would cover for him. But now, they had their own problems. Desperation hit fast. He tried to get work. Something easy, something that would make him look ordinary. But employers weren't exactly lining up to hire a guy whose resume consisted of full-time influencer. Nobody cared about his follower count. Nobody cared that he built a brand. All they saw was a guy with no skills and a reputation for entitlement. He tried freelancing. He set up an exclusive coaching program, basically a glorified cash grab where he charged people to learn how to build their personal brand. No one signed up. He tried launching a podcast. The only listeners were bots. He even flirted with the idea of reality TV, but without a scandal or fan base, producers didn't bite. The walls were closing in. So he did the only thing left. He showed up at my office. I had expected this moment, the moment where he'd finally have to face reality, to acknowledge that the world didn't owe him anything. He stood in front of my desk, shifting uncomfortably, forcing out words that had probably never left his mouth before. I just need a chance. Something. I know I screwed up. I just need a way to start over. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just leaned back, arms crossed, and let him sit in his own discomfort for a moment before answering. Fine, I said. You want a job? Start at the bottom. We need servers at one of the restaurants. You work hard. You move up. Simple as that. His face twisted like I just insulted his entire existence. A server? You want me to carry plates? Clean tables? I shrugged. It's called work, Zach. You should try it. He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. I'm not doing that. That's humiliating. Then find something else, I said, already turning back to my computer. But this is the only offer you're getting. For the first time in his life, Zach had no exit strategy, no easy out, no safety net. And instead of swallowing his pride, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Taking full control of Carter's Prime was the easiest decision I had ever made. Fixing it? That was the real challenge. The company had been bled dry for years, but now, with the dead weight gone, I could finally rebuild it the right way. No more reckless spending. No more vanity project disguised as business expenses. Just a well-run, respected restaurant empire that actually made money. First, I cleaned house. I brought in real professionals, chefs, managers, financial experts, people who actually knew what they were doing. No more nepotism. No more cushy jobs for family members who had never worked a day in their lives. This was a business now, not a personal playground. The results? Night and day. Within a year, Carter's Prime wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Profits were up, expansion was back on the table, and for the first time in a long time, people respected the brand again. Customers weren't coming in for the hype or because some influencer was promoting it. They were coming because the food was damn good and the service was even better. And Zach, well, reality finally caught up with him. After months of trying to live in denial, he came crawling back. He didn't have a choice. No one else would hire him. No one cared about his social media following anymore. He had burned through whatever savings he had left, and our parents couldn't bail him out this time. So he took the only job I offered him, entry level at one of our restaurants. For the first time in his life, Zach had to work, really work, cleaning tables, taking orders, dealing with customers who didn't care that he used to party on yachts or drive a custom Porsche. He learned the hard way that success isn't about how many followers you have or how expensive your shoes are. It's about showing up, putting the effort, and proving yourself. And man, it was rough to watch. The guy who once bragged about never working a day in his life was now balancing trays and dealing with rude customers who didn't even know his name. He lasted a week before quitting the first time, came back a month later, tail between his legs. This time, he stuck with it. He had no choice. As for my parents, they had no choice but to step back. Their extravagant lifestyle was over. No more five-star vacations. No more throwing money at pointless luxuries. They had to live like regular people now. And from what I heard, they hated it. But that wasn't my problem anymore. The best part? I got my house back. The Malibu home they tried to steal from me was officially mine again, and this time, nobody could touch it. It was my sanctuary, my proof that I had built something on my own terms. No handouts, no compromises, just hard work paying off the way it was supposed to. And Liam, the guy who helped me pull all of this off, he wasn't just my lawyer anymore. He was my business partner, my closest friend. We built something real together, something that would last. And we made damn sure that no one could ever take it away again. In the end, I got everything I deserved, not because it was handed to me, but because I fought for it, because I refused to let my family define my worth. Zach would figure that out eventually. Maybe, but that was his journey, not mine. Because if there was one thing I learned through all of this, it was this: loving your family doesn't mean letting them use you. And success? That's something you build, not something you inherit.